Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Mark was always the kind of man who valued stability. He grew up in an average family, with parents who never showed big passions but deeply respected each other. Maybe that's why he believed true love was something built day by day, with patience, effort, and loyalty. When he met Rachel at work, it wasn't one of those explosive passions that blows everything away like a hurricane. It was something more subtle, more real. Rachel was beautiful, smart, determined. She had a light laugh, the kind that brightens any room, and a strong presence that drew attention without her needing to say much. In the beginning, he knew she was seeing other guys. Nothing serious, just casual dates, as she put it. But over time, between office coffees and longer conversations over lunch, something began to shift between them. Rachel seemed to notice something different in Mark. He didn't try to impress her with forced jokes or empty promises. He was simply there, listening, observing, respecting her silences. When they finally got together, it felt almost natural, like they'd waited for the right moment. 6 months later, they were living together. A year after that, they got married in a small ceremony with only family and close friends. From the start, they agreed they didn't want kids. Rachel said she wanted to focus on her career, travel, and enjoy life as a couple without the pressure of starting a traditional family. Mark agreed. He also wanted to live by her side, growing together as partners. And to avoid future doubts, he got a vasectomy. It was a conscious, mature decision that showed they were on the same page. For almost 7 years, their marriage seemed to go smoothly. They had a calm routine. On weekends, they went out to dinner, watched old movies Rachel loved, and talked about their plans, opening a small coffee shop in town, backpacking across Europe, maybe adopting a dog. Rachel stayed in the same office job, while Mark rose through the ranks at his company until he reached a leadership position. The pay was good, but the environment no longer motivated him. He started feeling like he was just surviving instead of really living. That's when the new business idea came along. His older brother, Alex, invited him to start a logistics company aimed at local small businesses. It was risky, of course, requiring investment, sacrifices, and above all, a lot of time. But Mark felt he needed it. He needed to prove himself again, to get out of his comfort zone. And Rachel, though a bit uncertain at first, supported his decision. Quitting his stable job felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if the parachute would open. The first few weeks were intense, packed with meetings, research, visits to warehouses, and long talks with Alex about goals, strategies, and deadlines. Mark threw himself into it completely. He spent long hours away from home, and when he returned, he barely had energy to eat. The couple, who used to talk about everything, now only exchanged basic information. "Did you have dinner?" "Yeah." "Are you going to bed late again?" "I think so." The intimacy, that spark that needs togetherness to keep burning, began to dim without either of them really noticing. Or maybe Rachel noticed, but chose not to say anything. Their hugs became colder. Their kisses grew less frequent. Their private jokes, those little secret connections only they shared, disappeared from their conversations. Mark justified everything with logic. It's just a phase, and once the company starts taking off, things will go back to normal. He honestly believed it. He had no reason to doubt Rachel. She'd always been honest with him, at least, that's what he believed for nearly a decade. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed to go on with life as usual. She went to work every day, stuck to her routines, hung out with her usual friends. Sometimes, she stayed out after work, saying it was happy hour or that she just needed to clear her mind. Mark didn't mind at all. He'd never been the controlling type. He trusted her. And maybe that's why he never noticed the small signs, her distant looks, the smiles that vanished when he walked into the room, the messages she hid when her phone buzzed. Until, on a grey Tuesday, while he was answering work emails on his laptop, Mark received an anonymous message. No sender, no signature, just a short sentence: "Your wife isn't being honest with you. She doesn't come home late because of traffic. He stared at the screen for several minutes, unsure whether to laugh or worry. It could have been a cruel prank, someone jealous, trying to plant suspicion. But something about that line got stuck in his mind. He reread it dozens of times, and for the first time in a long while, his heart raced not with love, but with fear. A fear that showed up like a tiny seed, small, but disturbing. Right then, Mark realized that maybe things weren't as okay as he'd thought. Rachel never planned to cheat. She kept telling herself that, like she was trying to prove the mistakes she made were just the result of chance, impulse, or loneliness. But the truth was that the emptiness didn't appear overnight, it grew slowly, like an invisible crack in an old wall. At first, she didn't notice it. She thought Mark's tiredness was temporary, that his silence was just a sign of a tough phase. But the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and after a while, Rachel began feeling alone even at home. At work, where she used to just clock in and clock out, she started staying longer. One more meeting, one more coffee with colleagues, a longer chat in the hallway. That's how she really got to know Josh. He'd always been around, part of the same team, but until then they'd never had more than casual office talk. Josh was an easygoing guy with a joke always at the ready, the kind of person who instantly knew how to make a woman smile. And Rachel, starved for attention, let herself be drawn in by his laid-back attitude, so different from Mark's seriousness. They started talking more and more. First during lunch breaks, then texting each other outside of work. Rachel began losing herself, not so much in the physical betrayal, but in that desire to feel noticed again, to feel wanted. Josh would ask how she was, tell her how smart he thought she was, compliment even the smallest things, like her nail polish or her hairstyle. For someone who'd only heard silence at home for months, it was like a warm breeze after a painfully long winter. One day, after a company happy hour, Rachel offered to drive Josh home. They chatted in the car much longer than necessary. They laughed, shared stories from their past, and when the conversation stopped, the silence wasn't awkward, it was meaningful. She pulled up in front of his building, and before she could say anything, Josh kissed her. It wasn't rushed or forceful. It was slow, almost polite, like he was asking permission to enter a place that wasn't his. Rachel kissed him back, feeling guilty, desiring him, and hating herself all at once. But she still kissed him. Over the next few days, she tried to stay away. She felt ashamed. She thought of Mark and everything they'd built together. But the distance between her and her husband was so huge by then that her guilt seemed to fade into the cracks of their relationship. Then came the second time, and the third, until it became routine. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Rachel said she'd be working late. Sometimes she blamed a team gathering, other times, she just said she was too tired to talk when she came home. Mark, more and more consumed by his startup, never asked questions. She came back late, showered quietly, and went to bed facing away from him. Her involvement with Josh went further than Rachel ever imagined. He wasn't just an escape, he became a constant presence in her thoughts, someone she could laugh with, talk to, and who made her feel alive. And that was exactly when fear and confusion started creeping into her emotions. Workplace rumors hinted that Mark, now running his own business, might be seeing a client. Rachel never saw anything herself, but jealousy took hold. The irony was cruel, she was cheating yet began suspecting her own husband. She checked social media, read his emails more closely, analyzed every response he gave with cold suspicion. And instead of holding back, she used that suspicion as an internal excuse to keep doing what she was doing. It was easier to believe they were both in the wrong than to admit she was the first to cross the line. Meanwhile, Josh was getting more attached. He talked about trips, told her she deserved better, and said he wanted more with her. Rachel listened, smiling with uncertainty. She knew she didn't love Josh. But there was a rush in leading that double life, a sweet risk that made her forget, just for a bit, her frustration and sense of abandonment. Then, one afternoon, when she came home, she felt something was off. Mark was there in the living room, his expression rigid, his eyes dull. She greeted him, and he simply nodded, barely looking away from his laptop. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Something was different, out of place. He didn't seem angry or sad, just distant, like he was physically there but not really present. She tried starting a conversation, but he replied with single words, and at that moment, without any real proof, Rachel knew. He knew. She didn't know how or when, but something had changed. And for the first time since this all began, she felt real fear, not of being caught, but of losing everything, of having gone too far, of not being able to turn back. Rachel spent the next few days feeling like she was walking on broken glass. Every step, every word, every gesture felt like it might trigger a painful truth. Mark was acting strangely. He no longer asked where she'd been, nor did he ask about her lateness. Things that used to bother him were now met with silence. And that silence, more than any yelling, was unbearable. There was a gap between them that was no longer just emotional, it was physical, almost visible. They lived under the same roof, but didn't share the same life. It was like they were in parallel worlds, crossing paths only out of routine. Rachel tried, without success, to reclaim small moments of connection. She made Mark's favorite coffee in the morning. She left short notes wishing him luck for a meeting or reminding him to take a coat when it was cold. But he only thanked her with a polite smile, like he might give to a stranger holding a door open. Sometimes she thought about confessing everything, telling him the whole truth, admitting her mistakes, begging for forgiveness. But fear held her back. Fear of his reaction, fear of losing him, fear of seeing disgust in his eyes. So instead of being brave, she kept pretending things might somehow return to how they used to be. On a Saturday night, Rachel took the initiative and sat next to Mark on the couch. The movie on TV was just background noise. She turned off the sound, looked at him, and said quietly, almost like she was asking for permission, "Mark, we need to talk." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her with empty eyes, like he already knew what was coming. Rachel took a deep breath, wrung her hands together, and began. She didn't use fancy excuses. She didn't blame his job, the rumors, or her loneliness. She said she messed up, that she got involved with someone at work, that she never planned it, that she'd been weak, that she got lost. And in the end, she said she still loved him, that what she felt for him was real, that even after everything, her heart was still his. Mark stayed quiet for what felt like ages. This silence was different now, no longer from exhaustion or distance, but from deep disappointment. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. It didn't shake. It was calm, firm, but weighed down with a sadness Rachel had never heard in him before. "You say you love me, but love isn't just a feeling," he said. "Love is a choice. And you chose someone else." She tried to explain, saying it was only physical, that she never loved Josh, that it was just a way to escape. Mark slowly shook his head. "You had time to stop. Time to come to me. Time to talk. But you didn't. You kept going. You hid it. You made another life while destroying ours." Rachel was crying, begging him to forgive her, saying she'd do whatever it took. She promised to cut Josh out of her life, to start over, even if it was from scratch. But Mark, with tears in his eyes yet keeping his voice firm, said, "Trust is like a glass. Once it's broken, you can glue it back together, but it'll never be the same. I'll never be able to look at you and not remember what happened. And that isn't your fault. It's just what comes from the choice you made." She sat there, trying to see if there was any chance left, but deep down, she knew. The man in front of her wasn't the same anymore. Something in him had shattered, and there wasn't any glue in the world that could fix it. Mark got up and walked toward the stairs, going up without another word. Rachel stayed there, alone in the living room, the TV off, her heart in pieces. For the first time, her pain wasn't just guilt, it was loss, a loss she created step by step, lie by lie, silence by silence. The days went by like time had lost its rhythm. Rachel dragged herself through her work tasks and through her moments at home, where the silence grew heavier each day. After their conversation on the couch, Mark never brought it up again. He didn't argue, didn't slam doors, didn't shout. He just stopped trying. He stopped being her husband and became a shadow, a person who shared space with her, but not his affection. In less than a week, he packed his bags and left. He left a short letter on the living room table, words that felt like the last page of a book you've already finished. Take care of yourself. I need to take care of me. Rachel read it dozens of times, hoping to find a crack that might suggest there was still hope. But there wasn't. Mark had left, taking with him the last pieces of their marriage. Alone in the apartment, Rachel would look in the mirror and hardly recognize herself. Tired features, dull eyes, colorless lips. It was as if the woman who once knew exactly what she wanted out of life had been replaced by a broken version of herself. Mark's absence was cruel not just because of the pain of separation, but because it forced her, day after day, to face the consequences of the choices she'd made. She'd lost everything, and she knew it. 2 weeks later, she sat in the bathroom with a pregnancy test in her hand, feeling like her world had collapsed all over again. The double pink line confirmed something that seemed impossible. She was pregnant. At first, she thought it had to be a mistake or a trick of the light. But she was already late, and her morning sickness was no coincidence. She went to a doctor, did more tests, and it was confirmed. News that would thrill so many people landed on her like a crushing weight. It wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right situation. It wasn't the right father. Josh, the man she'd been involved with, still worked at the same company. When she told him, over coffee outside the office, she expected any reaction except the one she got. Josh stayed quiet for a while, then smiled, took her hands, and said, "Maybe this is our start. We can raise this child together. We get along. Who knows?" But Rachel realized right then that this was the end of any lie that remained between them. She looked into Josh's eyes and, with the honesty she should have used from the start, calmly said, "I don't love you. I never did." Josh tried to argue that love can grow, that they had a bond that no one else would understand like he did. But Rachel stood firm. She knew that staying with him would just be repeating yet another mistake. She didn't want to live another lie to avoid dealing with the pain of the last one. So for the first time in a while, she faced reality head-on. She said she'd raise the baby alone, that she'd handle the responsibility for everything, not just the pregnancy, but for every decision that led her there. The pregnancy was lonely. Judgmental looks at work, questions from co-workers, rumors in the hall, they all became part of her silent penance. But to her surprise, that little being growing inside her offered an unexpected kind of redemption. As the months went by, she felt something she couldn't quite describe. A quiet kind of love, still without a face, that showed itself in soft kicks, in ultrasound exams, in nights when she cried from both fear and hope. She tried writing to Mark, not once but 5 times. Long letters filled with regret, memories, and confessions. She wrote about her pregnancy, how much she missed him, how sorry she was for ruining everything. She asked forgiveness not just for cheating, but for not being strong enough to seek help before crossing that line. She mailed every letter, and they all went unanswered. Mark never wrote back, never called. When the baby was born, Rachel held him in her arms and cried like never before. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was a jumble of gratitude, guilt, love, and a bitter kind of relief. She named him Ethan, a name she'd always liked, even back when she claimed she'd never be a mother. The first few months were brutal, waking up in the middle of the night, exhausted, to the sound of his cries echoing through the still apartment. But over time, she learned to smile again, to laugh at Ethan's funny faces, to be moved by his small milestones, his first smile, his first babble, his first steps. Rachel never tried reaching out to Mark again. She decided to respect his silence. She understood that, to him, this was all part of a chapter that had ended. Deep down, she couldn't blame him. She had destroyed something beautiful, something that might never be rebuilt. But she also knew she wasn't the same person anymore. She wasn't the Rachel who sought validation in others' smiles. She was someone else now, someone who, though broken, had discovered strength she didn't realize she had. Over time, she went back to studying, fought for a better position at work, and raised Ethan with dignity. She told him stories of bravery, tough choices, and fresh starts. She never spoke badly of Mark. She never made him out to be a villain. She only said that some people come into our lives to teach us something, and that the most important thing isn't what we lose, but what we decide to build from what's left. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.